Lib Dem spokesperson Munira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Ms Harris. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. And can I start by congratulating the Honourable Member for South West Devon for securing this extremely important debate. And I know that this is an issue that she and I are both passionate about and she cares about deeply. Could I just start by reminding colleagues, as many have already done, about who these children are that we're talking about today? These are children who have experienced the kind of trauma that none of us should ever have to experience in our life. After I first brought up the issue of the Adoption Special Guardianship Support Fund with the Prime Minister in March, a lady from Lincolnshire wrote to me, who is a special guardian for a child who witnessed her mother being murdered by her father at the age of 2. And that child doesn't qualify for child and adolescent mental health support for some reason and has only been able to access a limited amount of counselling. That's the sort of child the ASGSF is for. These are also children who've been abused and neglected. When I spoke to Purple Elephant, a therapy provider in Twickenham, Jenny, the CEO who's worked with adopted children for many years, talked to me about children she'd worked with who'd been made to sleep in the garden, who'd ingested heroin. These are the sorts of experiences these children have been through. They need our collective help and support to overcome that trauma, and the amazing people who step up to care for them, whether that's through adoption or often as kinship carers overnight, need our collective support. As one adoptive parent in my constituency said to me, she said, these children deserve the absolute best second chance in life. And so I implore the Minister today, who I know has a professional background in this area and does care about this deeply, to please listen to the pleas from all benches about the support desperately needed. Just before I talk a bit more detail about the ASGSF, just a couple of words on kinship carers, given that I have been proud to campaign alongside my party for kinship carers for a number of years now. I want to welcome the limited progress we have seen under both the previous and this government in supporting and recognising kinship carers. As the Honourable Member for Easington said, we have to go much further. We've got to roll out allowances on a par with foster carers allowances across the country to all kinship carers. We've got to extend employment leave to kinship carers, and we have to ensure that children in kinship care are given the support they need in education through Pupil Premium Plus and priority school admission. And for adoptive parents, as my honourable friend, the member for Harrogate, said in a recent debate, they make a lifelong commitment to these children. And as we've heard from the member for Cannock Chase, who's also adopted himself, there is a lot more support the state needs to give them. One constituent said to me, the ASGSF is actually the only post-adoption support there is for these children. So that brings me to the ASGSF. Ms Harris, I can't begin to describe my anger and dismay at what has happened, and I will try and contain that emotion as I speak today, because the stories that are being sent to me, that I hear face to face as I have been working on this issue in recent weeks and months, have on a number of occasions moved me to tears. The months of uncertainty that these families faced when the government refused, when the minister sitting opposite had to answer a litany of written questions and letters from members across the House, from all parties across the House, as to whether the Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund would continue for this financial year. They were stonewalled. Now, these are children, as I've explained in terms of the trauma they've experienced, who have had a huge amount of uncertainty and instability in their lives, and yet here the government was adding to that instability. We were all stonewalled. And it required me, the day after the fund expired, to drag that minister kicking and screaming to the House of Commons chamber to answer an urgent question when she finally committed to renewing the fund for this financial year. Now, there was a sigh of relief amongst carers, adoptive parents and kinship carers, and indeed charities across the sector, that uncertainty had ended, despite the backlog that had built up in the meantime and the interruption in therapy for so many children they'd run out of money in last year's fund and they'd had to stop. But there was no hint from the minister during her response to my urgent question about the cuts that were to come. Instead, the government waited till the depths of the Easter recess to sneak out a private letter to local authorities and charities about the 40% cuts to the grants, about the removal of the assessment grant, to scrap the match funding in this fund. And to quote adoptive mother that I met at the drop-in organised by Adoption UK and Kinship yesterday, she said to me, this felt very underhand, and it felt like the government didn't care as I was dealing with my adoptive son who was dysregulated and trying to hurt me. There was no consultation with the sector, despite the fact that the government has these reference groups, like the kinship reference group that they talk to on a regular basis. No consultation with them. No formal public announcement. Even the website, the government website on the ASGSF, remained out of date for several weeks afterwards, until our first day back after recess, when a fairly scant written ministerial statement was issued by the Minister. So my first question to the Minister is, when she answered my urgent question on the 1st of April, was she aware these cuts were coming? Or did she inadvertently mislead the House on that occasion? Now, the impact, Ms Harris, of these changes to the ASGSF means we've got a backlog, and everybody who had previously applied, in fact, some 46% of grants that have been applied for this financial year go above the 3,000 limit. They've all got to reapply again. So there's now going to be a delay, an interruption in therapy. The mum I met yesterday said to me she's borrowing money from friends and family to continue therapy because in her son's last therapy session, she finally got a breakthrough and she couldn't bear to stop that therapy given the breakthrough they had just achieved. Purple Elephant in Twickenham is desperately fundraising to try and make sure that there isn't an interruption in therapy for the 40 or so children that they support. With the smaller grants, we know that these providers are going to struggle to provide adequate therapy, given the sorts of trauma we've talked about. These children, their brains need rewiring. They need time to build trust. Often therapists have to run several sessions before a child will even come through the door. That takes time. That's not going to be done in a few short sessions that these grants will cover. And given that the assessment costs are now going to have to come out of the reduced £3,000 grant, when a bespoke assessment is done, that's going to leave very little, if anything at all, for the actual therapy. And so, as well as the impact on the children and their carers who are desperately trying to look after them, this is really going to undermine and destabilise the charities and other providers who are providing this support. As many other honourable members have said, we're talking about children who will be dysregulated, exhibit challenging behaviours. It will lead to adoption and kinship care placement breakdown, which will result in extra costs on the taxpayer in terms of more children going back into care. We'll probably see more school exclusions as a result of these dysregulated behaviours, therefore poorer education outcomes, poorer employment outcomes, and sadly, care-experienced children are 4 times more likely to end up with a criminal conviction by the age of 24. Madam Chair, the cost to the taxpayer in the short and the long term are exorbitant, yet this fund is actually, it's only £50 million. It's actually, in the grand scheme of things, not a huge amount of money. And therefore, if the government wants to extend that fund, say by 50%, I can tell the Minister exactly where she can get that money from. Whereas when in her written ministerial statement she was suggesting local authorities, children's budgets can top this up, I'm not sure if she's aware, but a lot of local authorities are on the brink financially, and children's services, many of them are in huge deficit. Where she can find the money is the £46.5 million the Department for Education spent on advertising, consultancy and marketing costs in the last year. That amount is almost equal to the Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund. So could I suggest to her that she halves that consultancy and advertising budget and instead expands the Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund by 50%? Yeah. Madam Chair, these cuts are entirely incoherent and contradictory to government policy. The DfE has recently written to Adoption England calling for improvements in adopter recruitment. The Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill mandates signposting of support, yet all of these things will go against that. So I will bring my remarks to a conclusion. I have 3 asks of the Minister, please apologise to carers and children up and down the country, reverse these cuts, I've told her where to get the money, and please fight tooth and nail in the Treasury for the spending review for the next financial year and make that announcement early, because carers and children will continue to campaign and I will...
Shadow Minister Gregory Stafford.